Kylian Mbappe thought he was walking into a routine television interview. Just another stop in his whirlwind career as one of football's brightest stars. But what awaited him was anything but ordinary. The host, notorious for his cutthroat tactics, had meticulously planned an ambush, setting the stage for Mbappe to be humiliated in front of millions. However, what happened next left everyone watching completely stunned. Stay with us until the end, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Mbappe had just settled into a rare moment of peace at home when his phone buzzed. His agent Alexandre had forwarded an invitation to one of the most talked about talk shows on television. Kylian, they want you on the spotlight next week. Alexandre's voice crackled over the phone. Mbappe frowned slightly. Isn't that the show where they try to embarrass their guests for views? There was a slight pause. Yes, Alexandre admitted, but it's also a massive platform. Millions tune in. They'll try to rattle you, but I know you can handle it. Mbappe leaned back on his couch, deep in thought. He had faced pressure on the grandest stages of football, World Cup finals, Champions League knockouts, and some of the most hostile stadiums in the world. Could a television host really shake him? A few hours later, the internet was buzzing. The show's host, Mark Daniels, had posted a cryptic teaser. Next week, we put a so-called football legend to the ultimate test. Is he really as great as they say? We'll find out. Fans immediately began speculating. Some were excited to see Mbappe on the show. Others feared he was walking into a carefully laid trap. Journalists debated what kind of questions Mark might throw at him. Would he bring up missed penalties? Would he unfairly compare him to Messi and Ronaldo? The anticipation was electric. The night before the interview, Mbappe sat with his family, watching his younger brother play a video game. He smiled as laughter filled the room, but his mind drifted. They might try to break me tomorrow, he thought, but they have no idea what I've already overcome. He wasn't going for Mark Daniels. He wasn't going for the controversy. He was going because the world needed to see what true resilience looked like. The next evening, the studio lights beamed down on Kylian Mbappe as he adjusted his microphone. The audience erupted in applause, but as soon as it faded, Mark Daniels leaned forward with a smirk. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice dripping with sarcasm, tonight we have a special guest, a man who has conquered the footballing world. Or has he? Mbappe smiled politely, unfazed. Mark continued, flipping through his notes. Kylian, let's be honest. People call you a legend, but do you truly believe that? Or were you just lucky to be in the right team at the right time? A hush fell over the audience. Mbappe remained calm. I've worked hard to be where I am, but I don't decide who's a legend. That's for the fans and history to determine. Mark chuckled. A humble response. Convenient. But let's dig deeper. He gestured toward the massive screen behind them. Suddenly, clips began to play. Mbappe missing a crucial penalty in a high-stakes match. Another clip of him being substituted after a frustrating performance. The audience murmured. Mark leaned in. Does watching this make you uncomfortable? Mbappe watched the screen intently. When the clips ended, he nodded slowly. Not at all. Failure is part of success. Every great player has moments like these. The difference is how you respond. For a split second, Mark's smirk faltered. He had expected a defensive reaction, maybe even visible frustration. Instead, Mbappe was turning the moment into a lesson in resilience. Mark cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. Interesting, but some say you aren't at the level of Messi or Ronaldo, that you don't have the same aura. How do you respond to that? Mbappe's smile didn't waver. I don't play to be compared. I play to be better than I was yesterday. The audience murmured in appreciation. Mark realized he wasn't just interviewing Mbappe. He was witnessing someone completely in control of his own story. Mark Daniels had spent years mastering the art of trapping guests, making them squirm under pressure. But tonight, the game wasn't going as planned. Well, Kylian, he said, tapping his fingers on the table, since you claim not to be uncomfortable with failure, let's take a trip down memory lane. The lights dimmed slightly. The screen behind them flickered to life again. The first clip, Mbappe sprinting towards goal in a high-stakes match, only to scuff his shot wide. The second, him missing a crucial penalty for France, head down as the opposing team celebrated. Then another, him being substituted after a lackluster performance, frustration visible on his face. The audience shifted in their seats. Some chuckled uncomfortably. Others watched in silence, waiting to see how he would react. Mark turned to him with a grin. Not exactly your highlight reel, is it? Mbappe sat motionless, fingers interlocked. He exhaled slowly, then looked at Mark. You've played football before, right? He asked, voice calm. Mark raised an eyebrow. Not professionally. Then let me explain something. Mbappe turned slightly towards the audience. In this sport, you fail more than you succeed. You miss chances. You lose games. That's football. Mark chuckled nervously. But in that moment, everyone watching knew. Kylian Mbappé wasn't here to be humiliated. He was here to remind the world what true champions are made of. But aren't the greatest players the ones who rise above it all? The ones who deliver when it matters most? Mark pressed, his smirk unwavering. Mbappé nodded. Of course. But do you know what every legend in this sport has in common? He gestured toward the screen. They all have moments just like these. Missed penalties, tough nights, games they wish they could replay. His voice was steady, unwavering. The difference is, they didn't let these moments define them. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Mark shifted slightly in his chair, sensing the energy in the room shifting. Mbappe continued, his tone composed yet firm. You showed a missed penalty, but you didn't show the next game, where I scored twice. You showed frustration when I was subbed off, but you didn't show the times I played through pain to help my team win. Applause started, hesitant at first, then growing louder. Mark forced a tight-lipped smile. That's a nice speech, Kylian. But let's be real. You're a great player, sure. But there are levels to greatness. Do you honestly believe you belong in the same conversation as Messi or Ronaldo? The room fell silent. Mbappe took a deep breath, then met Mark's gaze without hesitation. I don't play football to be compared to anyone. I play to inspire, to make my country proud, to give everything for my team. Whether that makes me a legend or not, time will decide. A few claps echoed through the studio, then more joined in, until it was clear that the crowd was on Mbappe's side. Mark's smile twitched. He wasn't just losing control of the interview. He had already lost it, but he wasn't done yet. All right, fair enough, he said, forcing a chuckle. But let's test that humility of yours a little more, shall we? The tension in the room remained thick. Mbappe sat back, prepared for whatever came next. Mark leaned forward, tapping his fingers against the desk. He had miscalculated. Mbappe hadn't cracked. He hadn't lashed out or given him the viral meltdown he was hoping for. But Mark had one last card to play. Let me ask you something, Kylian. Mark tilted his head slightly. People call you a legend, a role model. But let's be honest. Do you really believe that? Or are you just a good player who happened to be in the right place at the right time? The silence in the room was absolute. The question was a trap. If Mbappe defended himself too strongly, he'd look arrogant. If he downplayed his own achievements, he'd look weak. Either way, Mark expected him to stumble. But Mbappe didn't answer right away. He let the words settle, let the weight of the moment build. He could feel every eye on him, some waiting for a rebuttal, others bracing for the worst. He finally exhaled and leaned forward slightly, his fingers loosely clasped together. Mark, he said calmly, what makes a legend? Mark blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? I mean, how do you define it? Is it the number of goals? The trophies? The fame? Mbappe's voice was steady. Because if that's all it takes, then football would have hundreds of legends. But we both know that's not the case. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. So what's your definition? Mbappe gave a small, knowing smile. A legend isn't just about winning. It's about how you inspire, how you lift those around you, how you face challenges, not just when you're at your best, but when the world is against you. The audience was completely still, hanging on to every word. Mark cleared his throat. All right, but there are plenty of players who inspire. What makes you any different? Mbappe nodded. That's a fair question. Let me tell you a story. He adjusted his seat and locked eyes with Mark. When I was a kid in Bondi, I had a dream that felt too big. I wasn't the strongest. I wasn't the tallest. but I had something that no one could take from me. Belief. Mark leaned back slightly. When I moved to Monaco, people doubted me. When I left for Paris Saint-Germain, they said I was overrated. When I lost a World Cup final, they said I wasn't ready. But I never let those words define me. Mbappe's voice was calm, but the intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. You see, Mark, I don't play football to be compared to others. I don't wake up thinking, am I as good as Messi or Ronaldo? That's not my motivation. He gestured toward the audience. I play for the kid watching this who thinks his dreams are impossible. I play for the boy in Bondi who wonders if he'll ever get his shot. I play for my family, my people, my team. The applause started slowly, one person, then another, until the entire studio was clapping. Mark forced a tight smile. That's a nice speech, but it still doesn't answer the question. Do you think you're a legend? Mbappe chuckled softly. That's not for me to say. That's for time to decide. The applause grew louder. Mark, realizing he had completely lost control of the narrative, quickly turned to the camera. Well, there you have it, folks. Kylian Mbappé, the man, the myth, maybe the legend. He forced a laugh, but the energy in the room had shifted entirely. Mbappé had turned the interview into something Mark never intended. It wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about resilience, about legacy, about character. And in that moment, it was clear to everyone watching, Mbappé had already won. But Mark wasn't ready to back down just yet. He leaned forward, tapping his fingers against the desk. All right, he said, forcing a smirk. I'll give you credit. You handle pressure well. But let's talk about something else. Some people say you don't have the presence of a true football icon, that you lack charisma. Mbappé raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Charisma? Mark nodded. Look at players like Cristiano Ronaldo. He commands attention. He's loud, confident. People hang on to his every word. But you're more reserved. Some might even call you a little boring. Do you think that holds you back? The question was designed to sting, to put Mbappé on the defensive. But instead he tilted his head slightly, considering his response. Then he spoke. Let me ask you something, Mark, he said, his tone steady. When you think of a leader, what comes to mind? Mark hesitated. Someone who inspires, who makes an impact. Mbappé nodded. Exactly. And there's more than one way to do that. He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed yet unwavering. Some lead with their voice. Some lead with their actions. I was raised to believe that a man doesn't need to shout to be strong. Strength is in how you carry yourself, in what you do when no one is watching. A murmur spread through the audience. People nodded, exchanging glances. Mark exhaled sharply, pressing forward. But football is entertainment. Fans want passion, emotion. Some critics say you don't show enough of that you don't excite people the way others do. Mbappe's expression remained unchanged. You think passion is about how loud you are? Mark shrugged. In a way, yes. Mbappé leaned forward slightly. Then you've never seen a kid in Cairo wearing my jersey, playing in the streets, pretending to be me. You've never seen the French people watching me score in a World Cup qualifier, crying because they waited 28 years for that moment. He held Mark's gaze. That's passion. It's not about how much noise you make. It's about how much you mean to people. The audience responded with soft applause, which quickly grew louder. Mark's jaw tightened. He could feel the momentum slipping away. Kylian Mbappé had taken every attempt to break him and turned it into a moment of quiet strength. Still, Mark wasn't done. He flipped through his notes, grasping at one last angle. All right, he said, feigning a casual tone. Let's shift gears. You've had your fair share of controversies. Some have accused you of diving, exaggerating contact to win penalties. A true professional wouldn't do that. What do you say to that? The energy in the room shifted. It was a direct challenge to Mbappe's integrity, and Mark knew it. Mbappé took a deep breath, his fingers lightly tapping the armrest. Football is a fast game. Sometimes you get fouled, sometimes you don't. I've never been the kind of player to look for excuses. My job is to play, not to argue with referees. Mark leaned in, sensing an opening. But do you think it affects your legacy? Mbappé met his gaze without hesitation. My legacy isn't built on what people say about me. It's built on what I do on the pitch. The crowd erupted into applause again. Mark's grip on the conversation was slipping, and for the first time, he looked visibly flustered. Mbappe turned slightly toward the audience, his voice warm but firm. Football isn't perfect. No player is perfect. But I know one thing. I've given everything to this game, and at the end of the day, that's all that matters. A standing ovation swept through the room. Mark forced a grin, trying to mask his frustration. He straightened his notes, glanced at the camera, and let out a short laugh. Well, Kylian, you certainly know how to handle tough questions. Salah chuckled softly. I've handled tougher things in life. Mark extended a hand, doing his best to save face. All right, I'll give you that. Thanks for coming on the show. Mbappe shook his hand firmly. Thanks for having me. As the cameras cut, the red light faded, signaling the end of the broadcast. But the energy in the studio lingered. Mark unclipped his microphone, forcing a tight smile as he watched Mbappe walk off stage. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, some whispering to each other, others already reaching for their phones, eager to tweet about what they had just witnessed. A producer rushed over, a nervous look on his face. Mark, we're already trending. Mark straightened up, masking his nerves. Good, he said, forcing a grin. What's the headline? The producer hesitated. Well, it's not exactly what we planned. Mark snatched his phone and pulled up social media. His stomach dropped. Mbappe owns the interview. Daniels exposed. Mark Daniels tried to humiliate Mbappe and ended up looking like a fool. Mbappe just gave a masterclass in handling pressure. That's what a real legend looks like. Mark clenched his jaw. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Meanwhile, Mbappe walked toward the exit, his agent Karim catching up to him, grinning ear to ear. That was incredible, Karim said, barely able to contain his excitement. Mbappe shrugged, his expression calm. I just answered his questions. Karim shook his head. No, you owned him. That interview is already viral. People are calling it one of the best responses to a hostile interviewer they've ever seen. Mbappe let out a small smile but didn't let it get to his head. People will talk today, he said as they stepped outside. Then they'll move on to the next story. But deep down he knew. This moment wouldn't just fade away. This was something people would remember. As the car rolled through the quiet streets, Mbappe leaned back against the headrest, eyes half closed. His phone buzzed relentlessly in his pocket, but he ignored it. He already knew what was happening online. The world had seen the interview. The world had reacted. And just like always, the world would move on. Karim, sitting beside him, wasn't ready to let it go so easily. He held up his phone, screen glowing with trending topics. This is different, Mo, he insisted. People aren't just talking about the interview. They're talking about you, about how you handled it. Mbappe glanced at the screen. Headlines, viral clips, thousands of comments dissecting every word he had said. He exhaled slowly. They'll find something else to talk about tomorrow, he murmured. Back at the studio, Mark Daniels wasn't nearly as composed. He stormed into the control room, his usual air of confidence now replaced with frustration. How did that happen? He demanded, pacing in front of his team. A junior producer hesitated before answering. Mbappe just handled it really well, Mark scoffed. Handled it? He dodged the real questions. He spun it in his favor. His PR manager, a woman with years of crisis management experience, crossed her arms. No, Mark. He didn't need to spin anything. He stayed calm while you looked like you were trying too hard to provoke him. And the audience saw the difference. Mark sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. We need a follow-up, something to shift the narrative. Maybe we frame it like he avoided accountability. Mark. The PR manager cut him off, shaking her head. This one's over. People aren't laughing at Mbappe. They're laughing at you. He clenched his jaw, scrolling through social media. Every comment, every headline made his stomach tighten. Mark Daniels tried to humiliate Mbappe and ended up humiliated himself. That's what class under pressure looks like. Respect to Mbappe. He didn't need to argue, his dignity spoke for itself. He tossed his phone onto the desk, scowling. He had been here before. Controversial interviews, heated debates. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't controlling the story. Meanwhile, Mbappe had already put it behind him. The interview was done. The noise, the opinions, the debates. They didn't change anything. He had training in the morning. And that was what mattered. By the time the sun rose, the interview had taken on a life of its own. Every major sports outlet was discussing it. Analysts praised Mbappe's poise. Journalists dissected his words. Even people who didn't follow football were sharing clips of his responses. One moment in particular had gone viral. Mark's pointed question, "Do you really think you're a legend?" And Mbappe's measured response, "That's not for me to say. That's for time to decide." The comment section was unanimous. This is why Mbappe is different. No arrogance, just pure class. Mark Daniels was fishing for controversy. Mbappe gave him wisdom instead. This isn't just football. This is character. Then in a surprising move, Mark Daniels himself addressed the backlash. He posted a short message on social media. "I may not have expected it, but last night, Kylian Mbappé taught me something. Respect where it's due." Some called it an attempt at damage control. Others believed it was genuine. But at that point, it didn't matter. The public had already made up its mind. Mbappé had won. And yet for Mbappé, none of it changed his focus. When he arrived at training that morning, his teammates greeted him with exaggerated applause. "Superstar," one of them teased. "Too famous to talk to us now?" Mbappé grinned, shaking his head. "Relax, I'm still the same guy. Now let's focus. We have a game to win." That night, under the bright stadium lights, Mbappé took to the pitch like he always did, without distractions, without ego. In the 70th minute, he found himself in front of goal. He took a breath, steady and sure, and sent the ball soaring past the keeper. The stadium erupted. Fans chanted his name. But Mbappé didn't celebrate wildly. He simply pointed to the sky and jogged back to his position, just as he always did. The next morning, the headlines weren't just about his goal, they were about the man behind it. Mbappé reminds the world that greatness isn't just about skill, it's about character. Mark Daniels had hoped to expose a weakness in Mbappé. Instead, he had highlighted his strength. The interview was supposed to tear him down. Instead, it had only solidified his legacy. And as Mbappé sat at home that evening, sipping tea with his family, he knew one thing for sure. Actions would always speak louder than words. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe for more stories of true greatness and character. And tell us in the comments, how would you have handled the interview? Your support helps us bring more incredible stories to life. See you in the next video. God bless.